we've got a panel of leaders, an elected leader, a leader in uniform, and a corporate leader for an important topic at a time of the rupture, as the Prime Minister called it in Davos, a rupture that is allowing the whole world, especially countries like Canada, realize things have changed and we have to be far more resilient, far more prepared than we are at present for some of the risks and challenges the world is facing. So I'm very excited about this panel. I really appreciate Jessica letting me weasel my way into this illustrious panel. And you've already heard, so we're going to get right down to it. We've already heard probably every panelist that has spoken so far talk about dual use infrastructure, the 1.5% of the new 5% of GDP that we're going to spend on defense and security. When I used to talk about 2%, the press gallery would roll their eyes at me a few years ago. And Prime Minister Trudeau was caught saying to other countries that we will never make our 2%. And this morning we heard Minister Anand say we will make our 5%. So for a veteran, this is like a fever dream. But dual use means something different to almost every group you talk to. And I really want to start off with dual use right away. So, Minister, as the Minister of Industry, alongside a number of other portfolios that you have in NWT, how is your government and how are you as a leader looking at the dual use question, both in terms of prioritization of your own infrastructure and major projects and that sort of thing?
I'm really happy you're starting here. Yes, thank you, Erin. So I want to start off by first talking about who we're talking about, because I think that's a really important part of this conversation. So I grew up in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories, and so I am going to kind of put an asterisk on this that I'm a territorial minister, so I'm going to talk about territories. And so I'm not trying to offend anybody that might be living in an Arctic region that is in a province and not a territory. So I just want to give that context. It's an incredible place to grow up. It's an incredible place to live. It is absolutely stunning in the territories. We've got 75% of Canada's shoreline, 40% of Canada's landmass, and we've got 150,000 people. Wow. So it is stunning, gorgeous, so much opportunity, but it is anything, it is absolutely not empty. And so I think that's really important that we start there, because we have, even though we only have 150,000 people living in 40% of Canada's landmass, we have Indigenous communities and remote rural Indigenous communities that are mostly modern treaty holders in Canada. And that's a really important part of this conversation that we're about to jump into. So now that we've kind of talked about who we're talking about, I think the next part of that is what we're talking about, which is what are Canada's goals? We want a secure, healthy, and prosperous Canada at the end of the day. And the North has to be part of that. And so when we're talking about dual infrastructure, we have to be willing to look at this much different than how we have in the past. I think in the past, we've looked at infrastructure as a little bit more 2D, two-dimensional, and we know that to go forward with this, it needs to be far more. And so it can't be just a warehouse that has a D&D logo on it. We're looking at it as in roads infrastructure, we're looking at it as hospital infrastructure, we're looking at water infrastructure, because all of those things really do come back to Canada's ultimate goal of security, ultimate goal of prosperity, and ultimate goal of sovereignty at the end of the day. And making sure that we're looking at this more as a three-pronged approach and a 3D structure that really has the resiliency and enable it to stand on its own, and to stand beyond this focus right now on the North is going to be so important.
Great. I like the way you outline that, Minister, secure, healthy, and prosperous. Sliding down, Commodore, the secure part, the first thing Caitlin mentioned there, how does the Canadian Armed Forces, and you're the Director General Readiness in the Canadian Joint Operations Command, how does the CAF look at the issue of dual use, and dual use specifically in the Arctic?
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matthew Coates. I work in Ottawa in Joint Operations Command, as Erin said. I'll agree with the minister right off, because that's what I should probably do, and that it's not about D&D logos on buildings, and that's something that I think we've learned through our experiences. I would start probably by saying that we have to understand where the Canadian Armed Forces is coming from today. We do have year-round presence in the north and the Arctic region, 440 Squadron, Joint Task Force North, the Rangers, and others. We have near persistent activity in the north in terms of exercises and operations, commonly referred to under Nanook. And where we're going is increased presence, increased collaboration, and a much more developed logistical support network for the region. And so when we talk about dual use, from a CAF perspective, I think that's where our vantage point shifts slightly from the 1.5%. So I'll give 2 examples. So we will determine the requirements that we have to conduct our support, operational support in the region. We'll figure out what that looks like from an infrastructure material perspective. And then where there is opportunity for the local community, government, other government agencies to take advantage of that when opportunities exist. That's how we see the dual use perspective. Conversely, we look at what other government departments and industry are doing. And so if we look at an example, knowing that Transport Canada has and NRCan have so many things happening in the north. So from our perspective, we want to have insight and knowledge as to what they're looking at doing so that we can leverage those relationships. And I think that's, from what I have seen in a short period of time, exceptionally different in how we are looking at a more pan-coordinated across industry, government, community, locals, not just put a building and put a D&D sign up. Yes, we do have our requirements, but we have to do this for the sovereignty of the country, and that is not just a Canadian Armed Forces solution.
Well, thank you, Matt. I liked how you sort of said how others in the Arctic can take advantage of some of the investment that D&D is making. I'm going to go to Sean. In terms of, I remember maybe 3 or 4 years ago at Arctic 360, Sean, Agnico, which has invested heavily in the Arctic, heavily in Nunavut, was literally offering infrastructure to D&D, particularly as you wind down some operations in one area and go to another. You've been investing because there's a business case and because Agnico had the vision for it. Now that the dialogue about dual use is happening, how are you adapting, or how are you looking to partner? Because in many ways, you were doing it before anyone else was even using the term dual use.
Yeah, I think the term dual use, we have to be careful. It's too simplistic a term, given the magnitude of the opportunity and the urgency around it. So it's, I would say, multi-use. I would say repurposed use. But around that, we have to be really creative in how we look at things. And so I think the original idea when we started to reach out to the Department of National Defense at the bureaucratic level was, look, one of the ways to unlock the potential of the North is through responsible resource development. We're going to just continue to run our business, but the Department of National Defense is likely going to need to make and will make more investments in the North. We should just sit down and let them know where the best rocks are, which means where the future mines are likely to be, and just have that discussion as they think about where their infrastructure should be. And that's where the conversation started. And it's evolved given the geopolitical climate we're in. And we're still going to build our business. We're going to continue to invest. We're going to announce a significant investment to get the Hope Bay mine up and running, which is on the northern coast. And we're going to do that regardless of what else is up there. But what we were trying to do, as you mentioned, is offer our experience, offer our relationships to the government as they think about not just putting money to work, but putting money to work on a timely basis and on an efficient basis. And Commodore Coates knows, because he's been to Rankin Inlet and sat with our people on how we can start cooperating. So I would like to use the word multi-use, and I would also like to think about how we repurpose things, because these investments tend to stick around for a long time, but it's really the coordination. And I would just say this around that topic. I was in Washington last week, and it was a critical metals conference, and there were 6 hours of presentations and fireside chats. The Americans are deadly serious about this. They have put money to work. They have their smartest people on these files. They are working together and closely together on how they can expand in the critical metals space, and part of that includes the North. So that just gives you a sense that, you know, we can do it in Canada. We just have to start talking at these levels, and it's going to turn out way better for all of us as we move forward.
Thank you. In fact, I think that's the strength that Arctic 360 has brought, is bringing public, private, nonprofit, territorial, Indigenous, Inuit leaders together to talk about that strength of purpose. And you gave me a perfect segue, Sean, because you said it should be multi-use, multi-purpose for efficient and a timely basis. I was in Ottawa last week for what the media dubbed Harper Palooza, as Stephen Harper was hung in Parliament. Now, Yvonne was calling for a different hanging years ago, but his portrait was up. And that timely issue in the Arctic came up in several of Mr. Harper's speeches, and I was one of his sort of right-hand people on Arctic issues. Everything he announced in his time as Prime Minister, the road to Tuktoyaktuk, the High Arctic Research Station, CHARS, the naval port at Nanisivik. Remember that one, Dennis? None of them were complete while he was Prime Minister. In fact, Nanisivik is still not complete, and it was one of his first promises. So it shows the need for bipartisanship, it shows the need for collaboration, and it shows the need, Matt, in how challenging some of these security decisions are for the Arctic. So I'm going to focus the next question on you and then bring in your colleagues. I've heard Admiral Topshee talk about the lily pad approach. You've talked about the hub and spoke approach. Right now, CJOC, and you're helping lead an audit of opportunities, assets, infrastructure in the Arctic. Tell us about how you're going to approach this, because, you know, the large bases in the south don't necessarily translate into something in the north, but every single road, aerodrome, or port has a security aspect to it. How is your audit at CJOC looking at these things, and how do you want Canadians to look at our operational capability in the north?
So I think the first question is, or the first answer is not to put it in military jargon. In fact, the first effort that our team undertook after the Northern Operational Support Hub was launched in ONSAF in 2024 was to focus on experts in engagement, experts in communication, for what we would call in the military to do recce's. And so just last year alone, our team went to the Northern Arctic region 12 times, met with over 79 different groups at all different levels, over 150 meetings, for lack of a better word, an opportunity to understand as much as we can about what's there, who the people are, what their interests are, and get to know and build the relationships. So to some extent, how we shape our requirements was not started in an office room trying to figure out, you know, how many tanks or how many planes need to go from place A to point B. Our focus was to be able to look at a map and understand who the people are, what the challenges truly are, and this goes back to Sean's point, because we have predominantly not conducted operations 365 days a year of any variety in the north. And so we need to get smart on how to do that. We need to leverage the experiences of those that are in the north, the companies that are working successfully in the north. It's amazing, concrete doesn't work the same in different parts. And so all these factors come into it. And so we spent a considerable amount of time building out our understanding. And so it was only at the end of last year that we brought representatives from within inside the Department of National Defense together to really start to put down what we had learned in order to then push out that military planning aspect of it. Now knowing that we have contacts and they don't call it a Rolodex today. I don't know what it's called, but the Rolodex will continue to grow, and we can go back and now we can actually figure out not just the military requirements, but what are the impacts, what are the challenges going to be, and how do we, because as you said, Erin, I work in the Joint Operations Command. NOSH is but one initiative in the Department of National Defense. There are many others that have been mentioned today. NORAD modernization has a plethora of sub-projects. NORAD Northern Basing Initiative is in there, strategic tankers. The Army has one for military or for Army mobility in the north. And so bringing all that together is exceptionally important. And so I think that is a different approach than perhaps in the past. And so when we look at a chart today, sorry, I'm in the Navy, so it's a chart. When I look at a chart and I say, what is up there? As I mentioned, there's 440 Squadron and there's the Arctic Training Center. There's a variety of items. I think now we have a much more coherent intent to bring it all together, leveraging relationships, knowledge, and coordination. And then the real question becomes, how do you do that?
I'm going to stick with you for a second because you mentioned knowledge. Where do the Canadian Rangers fit into that? And as we build out capacity in the Arctic, are we going to grow the capacity and even the operational capability of the Canadian Rangers? And how will Northerners of all backgrounds play a role in this new operational capability in the Arctic?
So I think the short answer is yes. So the Canadian Rangers are part of the Canadian Army, and it's my understanding that there is, like the general Canadian Armed Forces, intent to grow in our service members. The Rangers are part of that, and so we can expect that. But that's a great segue into what's happening right now. So I mentioned Opnanook, circa 2007 when it started. I had the chance to go to Grise Fjord in 2011 on a Halifax-class frigate, and ironically went almost that far with the U.S. Arleigh Burke, the USS Porter, which really digs into relationships, the positive ones that are so important. I just lost my train of thought there because it brings back some great memories of going up there. But
Grise Fjord?
Yes, Grise Fjord. Nanook. So Nanook, since 2007, has now moved into seven lines of effort, 7 focus areas that span, for all intensive purposes, the entire calendar year. And one of them is underway right now, Nunaluvut. It's approximately 3 months in duration, and this connects back to the Rangers. The Rangers are doing, I think it's over 3,000-kilometer foot patrol of the Northwest Passage. That's just, think of the logistics, the challenges of that. And so that is where we're at today and where we wish to grow, and the Rangers are part of that from the expertise perspective, and we're working to look at technology from all aspects, but a person on the ground in the region and making sure that they're connected appropriately to the military we'll call it the juggernaut, how they feed information in so that we know what they can see and where they are, and have that communication and pass information. So long-winded story. Yes, increase the rangers. Big activity happening right now as part of an almost year-long operational Nanook series of exercises, and it's only going to get bigger.
Yeah, that's good to see, because I think the Rangers have that capability and the perfect blend of traditional knowledge, connection with the land and people, and the ability for younger people to also then grow their operational capability. Caitlin, you've heard about the Canadian Armed Forces looking at opportunities, looking at the ability to service and have presence. How are the territories plugging into that? And yeah, is there collaboration with Department of National Defense? Does there need to be more? Are there elements of sovereignty and security that you're advancing at a territorial level that people in the room here might not know about but should? How can we plug the territories into this better?
Yeah, for me, it's a question of like, we started off by discussing what we're building. And for me, it's also about how we build that is just as important. Because at the end of the day, there's everything from details around how are we making sure that northern businesses are ready for what's coming. And so that requires a level of transparency and maybe a big ask of the Canadian Armed Forces to really give us some kind of timelines about what it is that can be expected and when as far as procurement. And I know that it's, we're not going to get a great big list that says on March 31st, this is going to come out. And then in 2027 on June 3rd, it'll be this. But at least the foresight to know what's coming in what years is going to be critically important for local businesses to be able to ramp up, to get training that's required, to bring everybody together. And that's going to be vitally important when we talk about this being a sovereignty mission as much as it's a security mission. And when we talk about prosperity and when we talk about, Sean and industry being involved in that, what workforce is required in order to get this stuff done. And if we want the territories and the communities where this work is happening to be able to participate, we need to have that foresight. It's so important. And it's so important that we also not just really capture the workforce that's needed to get this work done today, but also there's going to be tremendous amounts of operations and maintenance involved in this for decades to come. And if we truly want this work to be the generational change that I think the entire North expects it to be, then we need to make sure that we're not just thinking about building it, but we're thinking about maintaining it and how we're actually capturing certifications, diplomas, degrees, and the required training in the North that is going to be necessities for achieving that sovereignty and achieving those healthy communities, which is our goal ultimately at the end of the day for all of Canada.
I love that. Prosperity is sovereignty. Sean, how is Agnico looking at that in terms of both workforce development and, as what Caitlin said, that sort of small, medium-sized enterprises and supply chains, and how you're feeding into that, and that prosperity is really an extension of both private sector investment and an expression of sovereignty?
Yeah, I think the collective will in Canada is there to do something really special in the North in conjunction with the communities, so that we also at the same time invest in social infrastructure and elevate the communities. I think the will is there. The trick will be execution. And we have to attract capital, but the biggest issue is the skill set and the skilled trades and the experience of running businesses there. So that's going to be the challenge, to get way more of that positioned and ready to go. I think we're fortunate because we've been at it for a while now. I think we first went to Baker Lake in 2007. So it's almost 20 years that we've been there. And we can effectively build a $2 billion mine in 2 to 3 barge seasons. So we have that capacity to do that. And so we're doing constant training, and there's more work to be done in the community in terms of training, et cetera. But we can manage building a mine here and a mine there. It's that bigger picture where we have to add on critical infrastructure, where we have to develop and discover new deposits up there. That's going to require a lot more strategic thinking, and to see how the government decides how they're going to plug in that skill component into this overall strategy. So what we've tried to do is, and this just emanated from, look, we've built a successful business. We've had a positive impact on communities. We see our job is providing more opportunities to the young people in the north. And so we have experience and skills to share. And that's why we initially approached the Canadian military. Because we probably have better logistical capacity in certain areas than the military has. And it's sort of how can we work together and share some of those. And so things like if we're building and reopening Meadowbank, is there anything that the military could need or use in that region while we're planning our barge season? You know, can we move some things up? We're already moving modular housing up for the communities. Is there something we can do there? But these discussions have evolved beyond sort of emergency readiness and response to skills. And we're also in discussions with DND, the infrastructure component, around can we share skills? The ask was, could we lend some of our critical construction people to the Canadian military? That's a big ask, given that we're going to spend $2 billion. But there's a way that we can maybe bring some military personnel into our construction group at Hope Bay, a live project already, you know, moving forward. And so those discussions are early, but at least they're going on. And there's total buy-in and support from the federal government. Like, we've been on calls with Michael Sabia, the clerk of the Privy Council. I've mentioned the start of the discussions with Peter Hammersmith in the infrastructure. And part of that call, there was a number of other companies on, and we were basically saying, look, here's what we can do based on our experience and skill sets. You know, what can you do as leaders of public companies, big public companies in Canada, because the government needs our help? And Michael Sabia said, Sean, that's exactly what we need in Canada. We need that cooperation from big industry, the Canadian military, the territorial governments, but also the community governments and the Inuit associations and the Indigenous associations to sort of work together to get the maximum impact of those dollars spent. So we're encouraged, we're encouraged, but I think we've got a lot of work to do, but we don't have the sense of urgency they do in the US in terms of how they look at problems or challenges or opportunities and how they get right on it and put big money to work. We're getting there, and we're way better than we were a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. But I think the fact that we're having these panels and we're having these discussions is a great start.
Yeah, I think Arctic 360 gives us a bit of urgency each year. I'm going to put you on a spot a little bit because you spoke about skills and skills training, but Agnico was one of the early proponents of a university in the Arctic, and the Governor General is launching that university this week. Talk about your commitment to education and what Agnico has pledged as part of our Arctic University.
Yeah, our former chairman, Jim Nasso, I think Dennis knows this, maybe 10 years ago, he's a very thoughtful person. He said, I kind of don't understand why Canada is the only circumpolar nation without a university degree granting institution in the far north. So at one of his speeches in Nunavut, he said, well, Agnico will put up $5 million to help move this forward. And so NTK, Nathan Obed is moving this forward today. Agnico is going to commit $10 million to that initiative. We're not in the formal announcement because it's being done at Redo Hall and they can't talk about public companies there. Okay, we get that. We're okay. We're quietly sort of in the background to be supportive of that, but it's really more than a university. It's incumbent on all of us who do work in the north to create the conditions for success for the young people. The education system is challenged. It's challenged to provide grade 12 graduates that actually have grade 12 skills so that they can go into trade programs. And so there's things that we need to do as industry to bring young people into the mines over a co-op period. So there's things that need to be done along those lines. So education is critical to creating the opportunities and preparing the young people of the North to take advantage of what's going to be a growing economy and what's going to be a part of Canada that's probably going to create more value than a lot of other parts of Canada as we think out over the next 5, 10, and 20 years.
Well, they may not mention in Ottawa, but I think it's worth a round of applause here for that commitment to our university. So the only person busier these days than the people in the Prime Minister's office is Don Farrell and the Major Projects Office, because I think now every project in Canada is a major project, right? You know, we just got to accelerate and have a sense of urgency. But I think it'd be helpful for the group to get to know how levels of government are considering major projects and prioritizations. So, Minister, what are the territories' priorities, and how are you advancing your major project contenders, if we want to call them that, for funding and acceleration? And what do you hope the MPO will do? So if one or two of the projects are picked, how are other levels of government viewing the MPO and its role?
Well, not everybody's on a list, Erin.
So what's on the list for NWT?
NWT does not have a project on the MPO's list at this point, but it doesn't mean that we're not talking to them and we're not having these conversations. What do I want? I want them to build my whole list. So we have 3 key strategic projects in the Northwest Territories. The first is the Tallston Hydro expansion. If you want to have security, you need energy, you need affordable energy, you need clean energy. And so right now we have about 26 islanded energy grids across the Northwest Territories. Our power is the most expensive power in the country, even more so than Nunavut. We don't often get to say that, and that's not an area we want to get to say that, but we do. And so that's number one. Number 2 is, and I'm saying these in no order, so don't think that they're
you want
in
all
any
of them, right?
order.
You want all of them, yeah.
You want all of them. Number 2 is the Diefenbaker Promise. Speaking of old promises, and that's is the Mackenzie Valley Highway, was a Diefenbaker Promise from 70 years ago. And so we're still waiting on that one. And that one, though, it still goes with those 3 prongs as far as connecting communities, as far as being a security road, because it all of a sudden is connecting Yellowknife to Inuvik Forward Operating Base. And right now, I've got a member of the Legislative Assembly with me here. His name's George Nirasu. He's the representative for the Mackenzie Delta. And if George wants to drive from home all the way to Yellowknife, he's got to go through Yukon. Then he goes over to BC, down and little jetty into BC, and then he comes back up over through Alberta and up to the Yukon, up to the Northwest Territories there. And so there isn't a clear route straight up right now, and that's a clear route that we definitely need. Connects communities, security, and also connects to a lot of resources. There's a lot of natural gas up there, everybody. The third one is Dennis, our retired senator from Nunavut and previous minister, speaker of the Legislative Assembly in the Northwest Territories, mentioned the Grays Bay Port. And so we call that our Arctic Economic and Security Corridor. In the Northwest Territories, we've got almost 75% of Canada's critical mineral list, and they are completely locked in land. We've got no access to actually get to them. And unlike our diamond mines that you take diamonds, you put them on a plane, you fly them out. You're not doing that with critical minerals. So 2 roads, 1 energy project that are complete game changers, not for the Northwest Territories, but for all of Canada and a lot of other countries, allied countries that are looking for critical minerals.
So Hydro, Grays Bay, and George's Road.
George's Road,
okay.
yeah.
But how, so as you said, and I think it's important because everyone in the country is talking about the MPO. Right now, as you said, you don't have one that's been flagged as tier 1, sort of ready to go. How do you advance them? Is that directly the Premier to the Prime Minister? Is it you're continuing to work on the projects, gaining more dual use partners, other things to have them become a tier 1? Or this is so new, is there even a way you try and get your 3 from the batter's box into the game? What are you doing in terms of that?
There's always a way, and there's a lot of will right now. So we're not doing a lot of sleeping this term. We're doing a lot of working. So all the things that you mentioned as far as talking to the Prime Minister, talking to the MPO, we're talking to Canada Infrastructure Bank. We are even talking to other provinces to make sure that they understand the opportunities that exist for them, from our strategic infrastructure investments. So we're doing all of the above. And in addition to that, we're not just going around kind of painting the picture for everybody else. We're still moving these projects forward on our own. So for example, the Mackenzie Valley Highway, it's currently an environmental assessment. So we're still doing all the work that needs to be done. There are steering committees for each of these projects that have the GNWT as one partner at the table, and Indigenous governments sitting at that table with our Minister of Strategic Infrastructure in order to advance these projects and make sure that the people who need to be on the team are at the table. And that is how life works in the Northwest Territories. We are sitting on our team with Indigenous governments and making sure that we're all working together to advance these projects. That's key. The other thing that I want to say at the end of the day, Erin, and I know you and I have had this conversation before, is right now, in order to kind of play that chicken and the egg game with how do you get funding? Well, you got to get the business case. Well, how do you get the business case? You got to get the funding. You end up going around in this very painful circle where you need to go out and you need to do all the exploration and cross all the T's and dot all the I's. And I'll bet you that back when we built the Trans-Canada Highway, we weren't doing that. We just knew that it needed to get done. And that's where we are with the North. This infrastructure needs to get built. We've been talking about it for my whole lifetime. We've been talking
Longer
about
than
it.
that,
Yeah.
Diefenbaker.
Yeah, not 70 yet.
Yeah,
but
much longer.
I'll get there. I'll get there. But I don't want my own kids talking about this when I am 70. I want this infrastructure to be there. I want it to be built. And our kids actually rely on this infrastructure to be built and the North to be properly resourced and properly ready for tomorrow's world. We have a point in time right now where we either invest in the North today when we still have time to do the investment we need to make, or we're behind the goalpost.
Yeah.
I feel like it's now or never.
Now or never. I always interject as moderator. I take the moderator's indulgence here. But when I talk about commitments to the Arctic, I remind people of the early years of Canada when we stood up after manifest destiny threats from the U.S. Civil War, sounding familiar to the sort of manifest destiny we have now. The early country committed to build the Pacific Railroad in 10 years. It was built in 7. The Eglinton Crosstown in this town, one line on TTC, took 15 years. And that wasn't through Richter's Pass in the Rockies. So we have to have the sense of urgency that Sean talked about. So now I'm moving over to you, Matt, and I'm going to ask you, I think, the question a lot of people want to hear from you. So you're hearing how the territories are looking at their major projects. They need partners. They need to have it advanced as a tier 1. So let's look at NWT Nunavut. We've heard today the port at Kik. We've heard the Grays Bay. Can all of these projects happen together? Are they waiting for the Navy to decide where those lily pads are going to be? And are you coordinating in any way in terms of saying, okay, one of these projects will advance if D&D picks it as a critical hub? How are you approaching that? Take the ports, for example. They're in different locations, both deep water. How is D&D looking at adding to the focus of the territories, or are you looking at it? Is it independent?
So I think first I would say that Minister Cleveland has it right, is to get at it right off. And I mentioned to her previously, level of frustration, positive frustration, because this is a great opportunity. The government has made a clear and concise decision on what it would like us to do. And so, in good military context, we wish to move out quickly. There are barriers to that. Some are our processes, and some are where we wish to take risks in the future. And so, when we look at the North and we look at these major capital projects, we do have a review process of them. So there is a process through which they come into the Department of National Defense, and there are many military folks and others that sit and look and see how those projects or an individual project may or may not connect to initiatives that we have underway. for the purposes of determining, we need to let them move forward at pace, and we'll work perhaps in a different direction because 2 is greater than 1, or where the size and scope is such that they interject with where we're looking on the map, then we need to make statements to say, no, we need to actually come in and be a partner there and contribute. So when it comes to where we are from a Northern Operational Support Hub perspective right now, we've identified, as of March of last year, 3 sites, which double as what many of you know are forward operating locations, which speaks to efficiency, which then speaks to how you find the workforce to do all of that work. How do you sequence it? And there's a lot of effort in there because, that's the truth be told. I don't think it's really important. Is it a NOSH program? Is it a NORAD program? It's a Canadian Armed Forces Department of National Defense effort in a location that brings capability and resources to bear for the sovereignty of the nation. And so it's a little bit of everything, to be quite honest. We're looking at all of these to try and identify where we think we need to come to the table, or where our efforts and our requirements may be separate, but with the knowledge that we have to be transparent about it so that other agencies don't duplicate where we're working. And so I go back to the the question I've posed, which is the mannerism in which we do all that coordination, which I believe is the biggest challenge.
When Dennis earlier today talked about having a port at the eastern entrance to the Northwest Passage, one at the midway, are you looking at that sort of breadth and trying to say, okay, there's a fisheries project here, there's a mining project here, both are suitable? Like, is it that degree of, examining what else is happening, or are you just taking greenfield sites and saying, we think this is the best port and the economic part is not important?
No, I'd say it's both. We're very much in tune with what's happening in Qikiqtarjuaq, because whether or not we have interest to commit funds and effort into Qikiqtarjuaq or not, what is being done there, what can be done there, will have great implications on our efforts. And shared resources, so it goes back to the definitions of dual use, multi-use, redundancy. That's what I think most people would say about the military. Lots of planning, too much planning perhaps, but redundancy. And so redundancy is key for us, and what other activities are ongoing that we can partner with. Partnering could mean many, many different things, but I think the reverse is also true. Which goes back to, it might have fences around it because of security reasons, but the opportunity is not to close the door with a D&D sign in any location and say that everybody else must keep out. That's not the desire. That's not our understanding of the problems that we have, and that's why we're committed to the transparent conversation and why we spend so much time to try and understand what other projects are underway and what other people are interested in, and then how we can complement that and vice versa.
Sean, any perspective on the Major Projects Office, like between Agnico, Baffinland, B2 Gold with Goose, like the major projects in the Arctic have all been mining related in the last little bit. Do you have any insights for the group on how the Major Project Office is functioning? Are they reaching out to private sector players like Agnico to get input on what they're doing?
Yes, we don't have any projects on the major projects list, and likely because we're just going to do Hope Bay anyways. Hope Bay would probably meet the definition, but which is okay. I would say that it's refreshing how this current government at the federal level is reaching out directly to industry for input. We just didn't see that in the prior government, to the degree we're seeing it and to the level of sophistication we're seeing it. These aren't an hour call or 30-minute calls. These are directed 10-minute calls. What about this? What should I know? What should I be asking? What do you think? So we hear what's being considered from an infrastructure perspective. We get asked our views. Privately, we get asked our views. We share our views as taxpayers. And I'll give you an example, and it was Grays Bay Porton Road, where Cabinet Minister said, so Sean, can you explain the economic benefit of Grays Bay Porton Road to your Hope Bay project? I said, it's zero. Zero, it can't be zero. What do you mean it's zero? I've been told. I said, it's zero. I said, we're here and it's over here. And there's a big bunch of water in between. So does that mean that we shouldn't build it? Of course you should build it. Yeah, but you just said it has no benefit. We're going to build Hope Bay anyways. So it's going to open up the whole western side of Nunavut and Northwest Territories and create the opportunity, because there's a number of other deposits there, such as, and I mentioned one, how do you spell that? Boom, boom, boom. So it's that level we need to know, which is a good thing. But so the project we're championing is the investment in the communities and social infrastructure. That is the best infrastructure project Canadians can invest in as taxpayers, because that's a long-term investment that's going to pay off for decades. Port here, road here, this and that, that's okay. But unless the communities are strong, it's not going to mean much.
Great way, and I'm going to stick with you as we go back through this one last one, and then I'm going to open up, so start thinking of some questions. Caitlin talked about security, healthy, prosperity. You've touched on that. In your time operating in the Arctic, how have you seen even your own operations change, particularly looking at issues of social license, the environment, wildlife mitigation? We've heard already this morning mentioned a few times of making sure that migrating caribou and calving grounds and all these things are taken into consideration. How have you learned over your time operating to have that benefit for the community and overall mitigating the impact on the land?
Well, that's all about having good conversations early. And I've used this example before when a group of us went to Baker Lake for the first time in 2007. On the way up, we collectively said, remember, we're visitors. Even though it's our own country, we're visitors here. And we went to learn, and we stayed for 3 days. And on the way back, we said, boy, we can do business here. Because we weren't judged negatively as miners or because we were from the South. It was more, okay, how do we work together to do some good? And to create opportunity. So you have to get off to the right start and open up those lines of communication. And we learn a lot. We learn a lot about caribou migration. Even the communities learn a lot, because initially when we were pushing that road from Baker Lake to Meadowbank, there was some view that that would be an impediment for the caribou migration. Well, the caribou just ran right over the road. So there's a lot of things that you learn as you build. And so it's a true partnership. And you have to sort of listen and be good listeners. And I've been fortunate at Agnico, being here for 40 years and CEO for 24 years. I never had to worry at all during that time that our people were out there not doing the right thing, and building those strong relationships. So when we look at the industry, the mining industry, what the mining industry brings to the table as we think about how do we build value in the North, it's not just those technical skills, it's the strength of the relationships that have been built over time, because then you get that level of trust. And that's going to be critical to getting buy-in, but getting understanding on how the benefits are going to flow, I think is critical. But I think it's on us. We're looking at Hope Bay doing mine building a bit differently. When we think about the location of Hope Bay, it's mine building, but it's community building, and given its location and its history, it's kind of nation building as well. And its timing is important. It's in May. Like, you look at some of these things on the project list, some of them may never happen. Some of those resource things that are on the may never happen. We don't know. They're technically difficult, some of them. Hope Bay is going to happen. It's very timely when you think about it, given what's going on geopolitically, for the Prime Minister and for political leaders in the North and community leaders in the North to stand on a stage in May and announce a $2 billion investment, let's say. We're still doing our work. And it demonstrates the North's important. It can be done. and it can be done in a way that's cooperative, that's going to provide a lot of benefits. So this is really about a communications exercise when we talk about the North to 40 million Canadians on writing a check. Because the idea that we can go out and get capital, I think in some of the people that are listed as potential investors in the North, their pencils are too sharp. We're talking to the wrong people. Mine building isn't a science. It's an art as much as it is a science. And you need a rate of return of something, but you have to look at that big nation building picture. So Hope Bay will be announcing some community investments there on expanding our presence with the Breakfast Club of Canada to feed more young people in the North. We're expanding our initiative around housing to help them bring up more modular homes. We're working on a medical initiative to bring medical professionals and specialists from the South into the North to volunteer their time. The university was going to be part of that announcement. It's coming earlier, but that's a way of doing mine building a little bit differently. Instead of saying, yeah, hang on for the next 20 years, it's going to trickle out. No, here's some of the investments that are going to happen up front. We're the largest payer to Indigenous groups in the country under benefit agreements, over 20. Our estimates next 2026 will be the third largest taxpayer in Canada, bigger than some of the banks. Wow. So, and think about it, 80% of the production's from Canadian mines. So you can do this. And so that's why we're saying, look, how do we use that almost 7 decades of experience to do it more effectively and more efficiently and quicker?
Good to see you still have your passion as you went from CEO to chair, Sean. It's great to see. When people ask me if this government is really committed to the Arctic, I use this one story. Prime Minister Carney had 10 days that he was Prime Minister after becoming Liberal leader before he called the election. He took 3 trips: Paris, London, and Iqaluit. Not to Vancouver, where there's lots of seats, not to the 905. I really had great admiration for that because it set a new tone, which was welcome. So quickly, colleagues, Matt, on this issue of social impact, how are you, as you're looking at these sites, looking at wildlife, looking at the environment, is that factoring into your hub and spoke concept?
So there's two components to that. First is looking at I'll use a drain. So if we increase presence, what is that drain on the ecosystem that exists? And so there are programs within the Department of National Defense to bolster, additional water requirements, sewer, things of that nature. But we're also looking to industry. Sean has mentioned to how they have done it, because our Northern Operational Support Hub piece is not just fixed. It has the ability for deployed logistical support anywhere in the region. You asked earlier, like, what is the scope? The scope is everything based on the mission sets to the Canadian Armed Forces. And so we need a deployability piece out of some of those locations, whether it be maritime or air or ground. And so we know that, again, back to industry and their experience on camps. I use camps in the sense that it is not a permanent infrastructure setup. And so how does that work in terms of sewer, water, power, and at the same time making sure that it is all environmentally friendly to preserve that ecosystem? And that is part and parcel of all our conversations.
And Caitlin, wrapping up this segment, you sort of started it off by saying prosperity, security, and healthy, vibrant communities. What are you seeing as we're ramping up investment in the Arctic? Are we able to maintain that balance well?
I'm an optimist. I'm an internal optimist. And I think that this is such a huge opportunity to do this different than we've ever done it before in this country, and to do it right. And I think that that's going to start with, and I love being able to listen to Matt and get a kind of behind the scenes view of what's going on in their meeting rooms and some of the conversations that we've had leading up to today, because it gives me a lot of hope. Because one of the things that I think is going to be key in this is really thoughtful tendering process that is going to have to capture things like, how can we work with industry in order to get some of those needed partnerships that need to happen for apprenticeships to happen? How do we work together to make sure that some of these tendering capture pieces, like how do we ensure that that skill set to fix that door is left behind in that community? And I even think about, Matt had mentioned Commodore had mentioned risk tolerance. And I think that that's going to be really key in here too, where we're going to have to do a little bit of reevaluating our risk tolerances as we go through this process for the good. And I think that if we want people to be able to participate, we're also going to have to change our expectation as to who participates and how. And when I think of some of the ways that I know from small mom and pop shops that have been removed from projects, there's things like people in the north who are really working hard to go through their own healing journey. And if they are not able to to be part of this project because they can't pass a security clearance that gets them to the very top of a security level to go and clear brush or do some of that work or labor work, or maybe they've done their apprenticeship and they are now a tradesperson, how can we make sure that they can still participate if they're carrying along something from 20, 30 years ago? And do we have to have a one-size-fits-all for every part of these projects? And I don't think we do. And I think that's our key to success there.
Well, if it's giving you hope, we've had a good panel, and hope and hard work, right, Yvonne? We just need a politician to say that. Okay, we've got about 9 minutes for questions. If you put your hand up, I think we'll have time to get one or two in. If you can identify who you are and direct it to one of the panelists, that would be great. To the young lady there.
Hi there, Irene Gallia, Globe and Mail. I cover technology, telecommunications. Question for Commodore Coates. You had said that the Armed Forces is looking at technology from all aspects to improve operational capacity on the ground. I'm wondering if you could give us a few concrete examples of the gaps in technology that currently exist and what kinds of technology the Armed Forces is looking at to fill those shortcomings.
Good question.
I probably will start by saying I'm not going to give you the concrete zeros and ones you're looking for, but the approach when we look or are looking at the Northern Arctic area, now that we have a fulsome understanding, or not fulsome, we'll never have a fulsome, we'll continue to learn, the security aspects, the perceived threats, and where we are going in terms of supporting operations, we break it into 5 domains. So there's the traditional land, sea, and air, and then cyber and space. Wrapped around all of that is intelligence. And so in the space and cyber, I would say is the real technological aspect that we're trying to use because of the region being so vast. But vast is one challenge. There are many others because of the latitudes and the atmospherics, which challenge everything from communications to information flow. And so it's back to redundancy. And so redundancy is not just having 2 different satellite communication systems to communicate. It's do you have people on the ground? Do you have air assets? Do you have maritime assets? Do you have vessels that can contribute to the knowledge base? And so we're working across all those domains in a coherent mannerism to capture the deliverable, which is communication, information passing, et cetera, but also redundancy to make sure that if one system doesn't work, then there's another one. And then the question then becomes, where is that useful for others in the region? And how does it get used 365 days a year across all our operations? So there are a plethora of initiatives owned by those services in terms of specific types of communication that they're looking at and information passing.
And I know one of our sponsors, Dominion Dynamics, are doing something cool for Operation Nanook, so I'm sure they'll find you. Next question.
Hi there, my name's Isabella. I'm a graduate student at York University. I'm doing climate change. So I just wanted to know, this is a question for the whole panel. Many of you mentioned wanting to invest more in the communities, businesses, and workforce, not just for today, but to maintain these developments in the future. I wondered how you'll be implementing and keeping in mind how climate change will impact those things, since it's so ever-changing and exponentially increasing.
You want to start off, Caitlin?
Sure. So I see this being a direct relationship with industry right off the hop. In order for us to really get the leave behinds that we're looking for and the on-the-job training we're looking for, because that's where a lot of this stuff comes in, we really have to align with industry. One of the biggest challenges that my other hat is the education minister. So one of the big challenges that we have when we're trying to make sure that we've got the workforce that we're going to need for this is making sure that there are opportunities and equitable access to opportunities in our small communities across the territory. And we do have such differing degrees of where students are starting from, and making sure that students have access to the supports that they need, first of all, is a challenge. And so then to be walking in and saying, okay, we need to find out who's available to work, and then how do we get them to and support them to be where industry needs them to be. We really need to have industry on side for that. And so that partnership is going to be key for us being successful there. And I can't stress that enough, because without having a journey person, for example, for trades, and a lot of this is going to be deeply rooted in trades needs, is going to be huge. The other thing is having access to training that people can, and supports on the ground, but training that people can do virtually. And so having an expectation where somebody is going to leave a community for 4 years, sometimes they've got young families and rely on their family members that are in their small communities in order to support them, it is going to be vitally important. And as we kind of continue to grow as a nation, we end up losing a lot of the supports that we need in small communities for people to be successful. So really figuring out how we can lean on industry, but also make sure that industry is working in partnership with government, and government doing the same, so that we're not duplicating the same efforts and instead working together.
Yeah, I think one of there's some easy things that could be done, but the attention needs to be paid to it. One is the curriculum. Up in Iqaluit last summer, asking about the high school curriculum, and literally there's no trade courses offered at the high school level in Nunavut. That should be changed, we think, because the sooner you introduce people to various trades, the better prepared they're going to be. I think the other thing that should happen is that you have a lot of individuals that will have really strong practical skills that actually allow them to do the job of an electrician or a welder, but they may not have passed the test. So I think we've got to sort of think about how we can sort of manage the written part of the qualification to allow them to get their accreditation to do those jobs, because there's literally a shortage of workers. You can't really, it's not economic to bring them all from southern Canada, and it's just not right to bring them all from southern Canada. So there's some easy things to do, but I think it will take sort of industry pushing to get those changes made, and also to sit down and work and say, okay, how can we as a mine that's close to Rankin Inlet take some high school students for a month, and for half a day every day for a month, come to the mine and see the various jobs. So there's things we need to do, which are should be relatively straightforward to do, and then build off of that.
Matt, anything you want to ask? Or
No, the only thing I would add is, as Minister Cleveland said earlier on, our ability to sequence, to project and say when and where we're looking to build and what we're going to build, so that gives the time aspects in order to put the programs in place in order to build those skill sets, is part of our deliverable.
Well, I think this has been a great panel. We're done almost perfectly on time, and hopefully we've given you a sense of urgency. We've only got 45 seconds. So I'm running a tight ship. So let's have a hand for the panel here. Thank you very much, guys. Great job.
Thanks. Minister?